I would like to kick off the debate with the proponent of this statement, Dr. Inge Brouwer, who will be arguing in favor of the statement. I would like to share again, Inge, please be mindful of the 4 minutes that is provided to you. 13 seconds before the end, I will give you a short shout out to let you know that the time is almost up. But beyond that, it's all up to you. So I would say, please take the floor, and we're curious to hear from you.
Thank you. Yes, while I was waking up this morning and listening to the radio, I was actually very much astonished again to hear the great profits that one of our food companies was making and one of our energy companies were making. And I was asking myself, how is that possible in this world where still more than 2 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet? And how is it possible in a world where the labor rights of many people are actually violated? And how is this possible in a world that the costs of energies are actually breaking through the ceiling, even making more difficult to meet ends at the day? And that convinced me really again that we need to have a transformation, and that cannot happen without the government or without public institutions being in a leading role. And governments or public institutions, whether at global level, national level, but also at subnational level, should be in the lead. And I think we should support them to execute this role in a proper way. And actually, I have 2 major reasons, or top reasons, why I think this should be the case. And this is also based on not only listening to the radio and being wondering what's happening, but of course also based in the work that I'm doing in many African and Asian countries towards food system transformation. And the first reason is that food system transformation really asks for a societal change. And that change should be inclusive and meeting the 2030 agenda, where we promise to leave no one behind. And it's actually only the public sector task to ensure that the decisions are made and are geared towards those benefiting from these decisions, and essentially target the poor specifically. So a central function of the system governments is to give voice to the marginalized people, and governments should be able to do so, because the poor are the ones that suffer most from malnutrition, and the poor are the ones that are affected most by shocks, as is shown also with the COVID-19 pandemic. And the jobs of the poor are those that are not respecting actually their labor rights. So it's the governments that are representing the population, and they are mandated to protect them. And public-private partnerships tend to support the better off, and in agriculture often support the more entrepreneurial farmers, for example, leaving behind the poor farmers, for which we need to help them. So in this asks again for safety net programs and to ask for interventions of government. So also leading again or indicating the lead for the government. So secondly is that the food system transformation is fundamentally dynamic and unpredictable, and as such need a long-term, intentional and deliberate commitment for transformation. And it is the public institutions that are mandated to give this commitment to serve their populations for a longer time. You cannot ask this from private sector, for example, because the situation is so dynamic and changing quickly. You cannot ask them to continue to support in a situation where they don't get any profit. They will stop their business. And we have many examples of that also mentioned in the document or in the background document that is being prepared now. So in summary, the food system transformation we envision, they ask for a long-term intentional commitment for inclusive social changes. And that should be led by public institutions that are supported and are also held accountable for this by all multi-stakeholders, so including you all involved. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Inge. This was exactly 4 minutes, so very impressed with your time management. Wonderful to hear your argumentation. 2 core reasons where the mandate of the government is central, I believe. Asking for societal change that is inclusive is the public sector's task to fulfill, and it requires long-term commitment, which is at the core of public sector involvement there. So thank you very much. And I'm very curious to hear from your counterparts. Mona. So Mona, if you are willing, please unmute yourself and take the floor.
Right, thanks Danielle, and thank you Inge for that very provocative opening. Yes, I agree, we need food systems transformation because food systems are not static. They are changing and are expected to change with present day cultural changes, demographic challenges, climate change and all that. But I disagree with the statement that food system transformation cannot take place without a leading role. I underline the word leading. I have three main reasons to disagree. First, public institutions at the national level primarily are inherently weak. They lack reliable disaggregated data, especially on production, markets, rural economy, living conditions of the poor. So even if they're meant to serve the poor, they don't know what's happening to the poor. And that data, which is needed for good decision-making, does not exist. Secondly, they lack transparency, especially with regard to market systems. We all know that power is concentrated among a selected few in governments. Political interests and lobbies influence public spending and investment in the agri-food sector. Take an example of Nigeria, where import policies have created a havoc while dealing with food deficits. So there is no doubt of evidence to say that powerful actors' interests dominate or dilute government ambitions, however well-meaning they might be. Present-day public institutions and programs generally focus on one outcome at a time. It could be improving productivity, increasing production, livelihoods, promoting healthy diets, and they tend to engage only a subset of stakeholders related to that component. How are we producing all the food? What is the environmental footprint? Nobody seems to care. Remember the unintended consequences of the Green Revolution. So conventionally, governments look at components in a divisive manner. They're divided over ministries with their own goals. There is no single public institution that can integrate these broad and diverse domains. So how do you control food systems actors who tend to prioritize short-term benefits and exploit natural resources without looking at their regeneration? So priority setting, decision-making is not well organized or well structured in public institutions. It tends to lose sight of the complexity, the interconnectedness within the different socio-political and socio-cultural context, and the trade-offs are very, very serious. Public institutions, particularly at the national level, again, lack the resources or the will and the incentives to scale up solutions. So though they might want to reach the poor, they can't and they don't, because we see that public institutions can play an enabling role really, but I can give examples, but maybe time will not allow that, but I will come to that maybe in the discussion. But for them, you know, the choices they make are made on the basis of profitability, sometimes not always with social responsibility as expected. So for example, in the seed sector, low value food crops like cassava, forage seed crops, that might provide food security or income, have a lower priority as compared to maize, which always is serving the needs of the industry. So, and again, international and regional or public institutions may have and do have the resources to come out with such initiatives, but they have no control over how national structures can translate those initiatives within the national context. So in conclusion, food systems transformation is about governance, which is about complex decision-making, synergies, trade-offs between different components, different levels, local, regional, national, global, all kinds of governance structures which are in the public sector. While public institutions might have the ambition to reach the poorest of the poor, the million-dollar question is, do they have the capacity to create that common vision? And just putting policy instruments is not enough. Can they really lead and facilitate the interactions needed? Can they create those inclusive systems that you were so advocating? That combine public, civic, and market actors together with different agendas, different strategies, different.
Thank you, Mona.
That's the question.
Thank you so much. Sorry for interrupting you at the end, but I think we got the gist at the end as well. Thank you so much for your argumentation here. You indeed say there might be an ambition, but do they actually have the capacity? They're often weak, especially at national level. They might lack the data and information needed to actually move forward. Transparency is an issue. There's no single institution that can control the whole network that is needed to actually get to that transformation, and priority setting in itself is challenging, to say the least. These are some of the arguments that you put forward. I hope Inge was taking careful notes for the rebuttal later on. But thank you for sharing those initial arguments with us now. So we would like to invite back Dr. Brouwer and Ms. Dhamankar to take up 5 minutes max each to counter each other's arguments and convince us why your position is actually the strongest. And keep in mind, we'll be voting after this to see if you are convincing enough to us audience to move the other side. So this is your final chance to win over the audience. We can't wait to hear what you have to offer. So let me start again with Dr. Brouwer to start out with you as proponent of the statement.
Yes, thank you very much, Danielle. I think nice arguments have been raised. One of the arguments was about the weakness of the government. And I do agree that many governments are weak or do not have the capacity or lack data, although I think there are quite a lot of data that we can use. But as was said by Verco, that could never be a reason to leave the governments behind or not to focus on the government. Their capacity should be built. And to be honest, you know, who has the capacity to do food system transformation? As we are still, you know, looking around, finding out what food system transformation actually entails and who has the capacity to do it. Because if we know somebody or an institution who is very well equipped to do food system transformation, we would have asked them to come in anyway. So another issue is that, yes, food system transformation is a multi-stakeholder process where you have to include key multi-stakeholders. And every multi-stakeholder has his or her task to contribute to the food system transformation. There's no doubt about that. So giving a leading role, of taking a leading role by the public institutions doesn't mean that the other stakeholders can do whatever they want because the public sector will control them. That's not the issue. But what I experience in the countries is that stakeholders do respond or are sensitive to public laws or regulations or incentives and other economic measures that public institutions can take. So the steering of the food system transformation should emerge from the public institutions. And yes, others can trigger a transformation, but the leading role should be given to the government and they should be supported to do that. And don't accept that governments are weak. Just also make them accountable for things that are happening. And I think we all agree that there needs to be a governance. As Ruud said, there needs to be governance of food system transformation. But the question we are discussing here is who actually should have the lead and should take the lead. I don't know how far I am. Can I still react on the role of citizens?
Definitely, you're 2 minutes in.
Okay, so the role of citizens, yes, that's an important stakeholder and they are left out in many cases. In the debates we had in the different countries, it was really difficult to get citizens in or to get organizations that are actually representing citizens. So there's still quite a lot of work to do, but we also should be careful not to give them a power that they actually don't have. And the question is whether they can have an overview of all the different things that need to happen in a system. So role of citizens is important, but don't give them too many on their shoulders or responsibility on their shoulders in changing the food system for us. The same counts for youth. They're very important. It's their future, but be careful in putting the responsibility on their shoulders. So that's for me my reaction on most of the issues that have been said. I think scaling up solutions, yes, you need private sector, and I agree with Frans, we shouldn't blame or put the blame on one. Private sector, as I said, has a very important role, but they should not be in the lead. The lead is for the governments to ensure an inclusive food system transformation so that everybody can benefit and that no one is leaving behind. And that's a thing that governments have to take on. That's their duty, I think. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Within time, so much appreciated again, Inge. I know it's always a challenge to get so many comments and try to address these adequately, but I think you did a wonderful job. So thank you for that. Without distracting Mona too much with my talk, I would like to give the floor to Mona and give her the chance to rebuttal your argumentation. So Mona, your 5 minutes can start now as well.
Right. Thanks, Danielle. I'll start with sort of my counter arguments to Inge's points about why public institutions should play a leading role. She says that they have the mandate to reach the poor, but are they really doing that? I mean, leave no one behind. All this sounds very nice on paper, but you still have a high percentage of rural poor who are malnourished, affected by COVID and things like that. You yourself give the statistics. But so they should be able to, there's a lot of shoulds with the government, but is it really happening? And they have not proved that they can. Yes, food systems are dynamic and unpredictable. They need commitment over a longer period. Commitment, yes, but what about political will? What about resources to manage that commitment? I mean, it's again expected. There are a lot of expectations, but do they really have the capacity and the resources and the will to fulfill that mandate? Someone asked, then who should coordinate? I mean, yes, should we leave the governance to the private sector? No, I don't think it's a question of either or. I mean, civil society, each group has a role, they have a certain strength, they have a certain contribution, which ought to be recognized. Public institutions do have a central role in terms of coordination, but they have failed. They have failed time and again because they either lean towards the private sector where they have a lot of attraction for the carrots that the private sector might come in view of profitability, and civil society is always dependent on external funding. So they cannot mobilize things beyond the point. So how do you reconcile this is a $1 million question. I think the government can play a role of mediating between these various actors and stakeholders, but leading role and mediating role, there is a thin difference between that. I mean, it means treating everybody as equal. The minute you say leading role, the government has an upper hand, there comes in their way of working, which can jeopardize the whole transformation process. I think it's my obligation to explain the Nigeria example. We did a food systems analysis there, and what we came across may not be true for the whole country as of now, but the government investment was more towards cheap food imports and not so much towards investing in productivity and enhancement, which in turn, you know, when you say food deficit, imports can take care of deficit, but it's more like a quick fix, whereas long-term productivity enhancement investments could also address the food deficit if carefully implemented. Yes, there is an absence of good public institutions. And what is a good public institution? An institution that is transparent, an institution that is willing, an institution that has the right kind of people. I'm not talking about only knowledge and skills, but also the right mindset to reach the poorest of the poor. We see that public institutions are failing in their outreach, though it is one of the biggest outreach, in comparison to any private sector or civil society organization. But why don't they go there? I mean, you can take the help of agencies that have that outreach and work together and complement each other. I mean, I can give you an example of the QDS system that Uganda has the policy and for a QDS system, but it's for food crops. I mean, it is an alternative to certified seed. It is a seed that is produced by registered farmer-led local businesses. It could play a significant role in serving smallholder farmers within the last mile, but it still doesn't happen. Why? Because the choice of crops, again, goes towards the profit-oriented crops, not so much the food crops that are so desperately needed by the rural poor to maintain their food and nutrition security. Even forage seeds, the project that I was involved in, is such a low priority crop that it doesn't get the attention, and there are no programs that can support farmer-saved seed systems or smallholder-based seed entrepreneurs, farmer entrepreneurs and it is also another way of jeopardizing the valuable genetic diversity. So there's so much that the government can do and should do, but does not do. That's the argument.
30 seconds.
And yeah, regional public institutions, international institutions can help but they again have sort of shy away when it comes to national context. They have no control. They cannot influence things beyond a point in the national arena. So I don't know what, merely putting instruments, like I said, cannot work. Maybe we need to look for more disruptive solutions. Maybe we need to look at how do we reconcile the competing demands between these different stakeholders and come out with mechanisms and policies, maybe define new institutions, which are public, private, and civil society. I'm not talking about platforms. They have their merits and demerits, but something more concrete.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you. And I think that's a good question to end up the argumentation with. Some food for thought for all of us, probably. Do we need disruptive solutions next to everything that we're proposing already? Thank you both, Inge and Mona. Just to recap a little bit of some of the arguments in the rebuttal just provided by Inge, for example, is saying that, okay, governments are weak, that's a good argument, but it doesn't leave us with enough reason to leave them completely out of the picture. Who does actually have that capacity to tackle everything that needs to be done in transforming? There is a need for governance, and we can't leave it up to, for example, citizens who can't be burdened with that too much of the responsibility. Same for scaling up of solutions. It is needed, but we don't necessarily want profit-making institutions, such as private institutions, to take the lead in this. Mona, on the other hand, as I understand, says there's a mandate, great, but are they actually doing this? We still haven't seen the proof that they actually have the capacity and the capability, and perhaps even the commitment and will to take on the role that is given to them if they would be asked to take the lead in this. Resources are still lacking. The governance by a private sector is not necessarily the answer or the alternative that Mona is proposing. Rather, we have to see whether there's other constitutions and other setups that would be more favorable to this. And also, thank you very much for addressing the Nigeria case example. Of course, I'm sure that our willing participant in the room is happy to hear your feedback to that. So with that, I would like to thank you both very much for taking up, as I said earlier, the verbal boxing gloves and battling out this very intriguing statement, I believe, which opened a lot of questions still, I think, that could be answered. I would like to turn now again to opening up the Mentimeter votes while we close up this discussion, because I'm very curious to see whether participants here in the room have actually shifted their opinion since they have heard your statements. So let's turn to, once again, the voting tool on Mentimeter. I see Inge already laughing or smiling broadly to see whether there has been a change. There we go. We see already actually quite a strong shift towards no, I do not support this statement. Earlier on, I believe we had yes, I support this statement. That is actually surprising. We have 17 votes coming in already. Last time we had 30 votes, just to be fair and honest. So we should give everybody some time still to put in some votes. I'm seeing some disappointment in the faces of the debaters. Please don't feel disappointed, because I think we all did a very wonderful job in putting down our arguments. While the votes are still coming in, I actually would like to turn back to you, Inge and Mona. Is there anything that you would like to close off, knowing that we pushed you in a certain role today, but perhaps you wish to end your discussion with a personal statement of some sort in closing off your argument? So perhaps, Inge, is there anything still that you would like to close off with?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have to step out of our roles now. And I think very nice arguments came up. And it's a pity that those that support the statement changed their mind. Because while working in Vietnam and Ethiopia, where we are working towards food system transformation, we do see that the government is taking steps. And yeah, I really would like to continue to support them. I mean, the changes are taking place in Ethiopia, and there should be a lead, and nobody is actually taking the lead. There are no examples of others taking the lead. So I think the only option we do have is to put public institutions in their seat and help them to do what they actually need to do and help them to be accountable for this. So yes, I was really very happy to do this debate and to dive into to one of the statements. And I would like to thank Mona also for her argumentation. They were really good. So thanks a lot for this session.
Thank you so much, Inge. And Mona, would you like to close as well?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to polarize the argument. I mean, I'm with Inge when I say that there's no either or. I guess everyone has a role and has certain strengths that we need to capitalize on. I mean, the government, really, I believe in the government. It is one of the biggest organizations and entities that can do things if it really wants to. That is the key, that how do you make the government want to do it? And how do you create that capacity, the will? Resources come and go. I don't think resources are that big a problem, but it's the mismanagement or management of resources that is the problem. And I think if there are watchdogs like civil society organizations to keep government in check and assist the government where it cannot reach and where it falls short, I guess it's a complementary effort that is required. I mean, this sounds very diplomatic, but I guess unless people get their noses in the same direction, this is not going to work. And yes, there is an urgency. It's not something that we can wait and watch. I guess the private sector also needs to behave itself. It's not a villain. It can also turn around and help. But how do you, give them something in return that they can justify their social responsibility towards? I guess it's a matter of maybe knowledge institutes should take over. I don't know. Maybe we have a role to convince these entities how they can work together and find a way. There is no more time left for experimentation, unfortunately. That's the sad part.
Yes, I think that's very strong and perhaps a little realistic closing to the statement that we all probably share. There is little time left, if any, to actually make changes. So let's not perhaps fall into a discussion who should lead, but let's just take the lead altogether and move forward rather than discussing it over and over and over again. I see a lot of people saying in the chat box of Zoom, yes, 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 to both of your statements or closing remarks. So I believe that the depolarization efforts actually is very much supported by everyone. And if you see the Mentimeter voting now coming in, I believe that Inge should feel proud still as well, because both of the votes are actually quite close now. With a few less votes coming in this round. So I believe you both have found people to nuance their opinions perhaps more than as they were before, where they were very rigid perhaps in one or the other side. So I think that's always the great benefits of organizing a debate where these kind of opportunities arise. So with that, I would actually like to thank the audience, of course, for contributing and sharing your opinions and staying focused throughout this debate, but of course, to you both as well as debaters. Thank you very much for taking this daunting task of debating it out in positions that might be uncomfortable to you to a certain extent. So much appreciated that you wanted to participate.